I want to give you a couple little hints about some things. When you see Jesus sitting at meal, when you see him breaking bread with somebody, it almost inferably goes back to the Lord's Supper, to communion. It goes back to the Eucharist. It always points towards that generally. We see it here. What does he do with the bread? He breaks it. And he blesses it. Very much reminiscent of what happens at the Last Supper. Also, in his last meal with the disciples before his ascension by the Sea of Galilee, you remember Peter comes running in with the boat and all the rest come following. And he sits there and he has a fire and coals already on the beach. And they have a meal. What does he do? He blesses and does. It's very reminiscent of communion, of what God is doing through his blessed and holy meal. But we see in this lesson today a juxtaposition of two meals. Now, there was a meal and a party that took place right before this in chapter 14. Herod had his birthday party. He has a big meal. And it is totally different from the meal that we see Jesus have here with all of the crowd. Another thing about reading the Gospels, and especially when you get into the Gospel of Matthew and of Mark, and it's something that has always amazed me since it has been pointed out to me. Watch the crowds. The crowd becomes part of the story. And the crowd did this, and the crowd did that, and the crowd's here, and the crowd's there. The crowd's everywhere. They are a large part of the story of Jesus. When it was pointed out to me, it just amazed me how often you see the crowd. So that's something to think about. But we see another party, another meal happening with Herod. And this meal was all about being selfish. It was all about Herod. Everything pointed to him. And not everybody was invited to this meal. Anybody could come to the meal of Jesus. But you had to have a special invitation to go to Herod's party. And what also happened there? Herod, we see a great juxtaposition from Jesus' reaction to people. Herod's reaction is what? He's scared of the people. He's afraid of them. Why? Because he has taken Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, to be his wife. And John the Baptist rightly points out and says, you can't do that. That's against Jewish law. You can't do that, Herod. That's wrong. You can't do that. And Herod is upset with John and seeks to kill him, wants to kill him. But he's what? Afraid of the people. Jesus is not afraid of the people. In fact, the people come to Jesus freely. And then we see Herodias has her daughter dance for Herod. Now, I don't know if this is some type of a suggestion. We don't know. We're not told that. But whatever happens, it says that the dance pleased Herod. It pleased him. And he told the girl, he said, ask me anything that you want up to half of my kingdom, and I'll give it to you. Whatever you want. She goes to her mother, and her mother says, tell him you want the head of the Baptist, John the Baptist, on a silver platter given back to me and given to you, and then you can give it to me. You see, at Herod's meal, there's death, there's hatred, there's vengeance, there's strife, there's conniving, there's all sorts of things happening around this meal. And what happens? Herod, he's not afraid of the people that are there, but for their pleasure, he does what? He kills John the Baptist. And he has his head put on a silver platter and given to this girl who takes it to her mother in great joy and glee. Now that is a true juxtaposition of a meal that happened right before the one here with Jesus, where all these people come freely and they want to be with Jesus. And here's the thing. We look at this and we kind of wonder when we see it and we're not given the first part of the text. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place. This is why he went to the deserted place, because he had just been given news of the death of John the Baptist. I don't know why he went to the deserted place. I have no understanding why. Doesn't tell us why. It just says he went to a deserted place. Maybe he went there to mourn his cousin, his friend, John the Baptist. I don't know. But he goes to this place. And it says when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. They go at great expense and at great cost to them to go see Jesus wherever he is. Not a whole lot of folks were going to Herod's party, and you had to have an invite. And I'm not sure some of them actually wanted to be there personally. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and what he had compassion for them. No compassion for anybody at Herod's party. It was all about Herod. It was all surrounding his selfishness and his ego. But Jesus had compassion on the people, and he welcomed them. And he cured their sickness. He cured all of their sickness. What a great thing. He put his, as we told the children, he put his compassion. He put that into practice. And he did something about it. And then the disciples, they come to him and they say, this is a deserted place, Jesus. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. And it's time to eat. What does Jesus tell them? You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. We don't have anything to eat. He says, send them away. Jesus says, they don't have to go away. You see, Jesus is teaching the disciples something here, I believe. If you go a little later to the meal we had talked about by the Sea of Galilee before the ascension, we're to feed the sheep of Jesus. And Jesus is reminding them, you should feed the sheep. They weren't quite getting it at the time. But do you remember by the Sea of Galilee before the ascension, Jesus asked Peter this. He says, Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. He asked him a second time, do you love me, Peter? Yes, I love you, Lord, for the second time. Then feed my sheep. He asked him a third time, and Peter, exasperated, says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Then feed my sheep. You see, the point of the thing here is they were to go out and feed the sheep. They were to feed the people. I don't think they were totally catching what Jesus was trying to do. Yes, we take care of the physical needs of folks, but he's also, I think there is another meaning here that we are supposed to go out and take care of the spiritual needs of folks. And they just weren't quite catching on to that. But later, they catch on to it. And again, they have fed us in many ways. We are the sheep. We are the crowd now. And who has sent this food down to us from Jesus? The disciples. They finally caught on to what was going on with Jesus. We can get all caught up into the bread and the fish and the great miracle. And it's a great, great miracle. As a matter of fact, this is mentioned in all four of the gospel texts. This particular thing is mentioned, the feeding of these large crowds. But the thing we need to let it do is take us back to the meal, the great meal, in that upper room with Jesus when he says, this is my body. This is my blood. You see, they ate, and this is a type, it's a semblance of it. But you see, we are not just fed with a few fish and a few loaves of bread. No, we are fed with what? The bread of life, the living water. He gives us life through his wonderful meal. He gives us grace through this wonderful thing. And I pray today that God would touch you. Whenever you read about Jesus breaking bread, it will take you back to communion. It will take you back to the upper room, to that Passover night when Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood. And we need to take the love of Christ, the compassion of Christ forward. Yes, a great miracle takes place. But we sometimes get so caught up into that we forget about the other meal, the real meal that Jesus has for us that we will partake in just a bit. And I pray today that God would bless and keep you through this time, and that you would totally take in the living bread of Jesus Christ this day and always. Amen.